A 25% tariff is not simply a tax, it is a policy instrument with cascading legal consequences. When applied to an integrated cross-border supply chain, it does not adjust trade, it fractures it. The Canada-U.S. potato trade, built over decades under the legal framework of CUSMA, is now under that precise kind of pressure. Bilateral agricultural agreements do not dissolve overnight, but they erode, contract by contract, shipment by shipment, until the structural damage becomes irreversible. This is not a hypothetical risk. The legal and commercial evidence is already on the record, and it begins with a single verified number. A 25% tariff on Canadian potato exports, described by industry officials directly to trade delegates as extremely disruptive to an integrated supply chain built over decades. A 25% tariff on Canadian potato exports to the United States is not a minor adjustment. It is, in the language of trade economists, a structural disruption. The tariff applies across frozen, fresh, and seed potato categories. Industry voices have described it as extremely disruptive to an integrated supply chain built over decades. JEP Canada supplies the United States with 91% of its French fry exports, 93% of fresh potato trade, and 96% of seed potato trade. In the 2023 to 2024 production year alone, those figures translated to $2.4 billion in processing potatoes, $457 million in fresh supply, and $48 million in seed stock. TikTok. These are not marginal volumes. They are the structural foundation of the American potato supply chain. Victoria Stamper, General Manager of the United Potato Growers of Canada, told industry delegates at the PEI Potato Conference that the tariff situation represents the defining uncertainty for every grower planning their 2025 planting season. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. The National Potato Council in the United States acknowledged the same risk. It formally urged the Trump administration to avoid tariff retaliation that could cost American growers market share to foreign competition and to protect trade in essential inputs that allow domestic producers to remain competitive. Rhine-West today. The contract collapse came next, and it came fast. Potato processors formally told Canadian farmers they would need fewer potatoes in 2025, with volume decreases announced even before contract negotiations were completed. JEP for growers in Alberta and Prince Edward Island. This was not an abstract commercial signal, it was a direct instruction to reduce planted area. Alberta seed growers alone were bracing for the tariff impact on $30 million in seed potato shipments, representing roughly 60% of their entire 2024 production, already committed and ready to move to American customers. TikTok, the Potato Growers of Alberta Executive Director Terence Hochstein told the grower publication that pivoting that production on short notice was simply not possible. Specialty seed varieties are grown for specific customers over multi-year relationships. They cannot be redirected in weeks or even months. As former Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Poloz noted in the National Post, trade does not happen between countries, it happens between people. And those people on both sides of the border still respect each other and still want to do business, making the political disruption to those human relationships the most damaging long-term consequence of the tariff regime. JEP. McCain Foods now operates 51 frozen food processing plants across the globe and produces 1 in every 4 French fries consumed worldwide. Rhine-W.S. today. That statistic is not branding. It is a legal and commercial reality. In 2023 alone, McCain processed more than 6 million metric tons of potatoes into frozen fries across its global facilities, accounting for nearly 19% of total global market volume. The Western producer, the company was founded in 1957 by Harrison and Wallace McCain in Florenceville, New Brunswick, on the bank of the St. John River. It began with 30 employees and has grown into the dominant private processor in the global frozen potato industry. McCain maintains operations in Canada, the United States, Brazil, the United Kingdom, Ireland, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Poland, Australia, South Africa, India, Japan, China, and more, with its products sold across 160 countries. Jeep. That global reach is not incidental. It is the legal and commercial architecture that makes McCain both the most important supplier to the American fast food industry and, under the right conditions, the most capable of redirecting that supply elsewhere. Understanding this matters because when trade conditions deteriorate, a company with 51 plants across 6 continents does not panic. It pivots. The dependency that makes this pivoting so consequential is confirmed directly by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's own official trade review. In 2024 and 2025, the United States market represented 90% of Canada's total French fry export value, a figure amounting to $2.5 billion. The Western producer. This is not a figure drawn from industry speculation. It is derived from Statistics Canada's own customs data and published in the federal government's annual Potato Market Information Review. Canada accounts for 86% of the volume of frozen French fry imports into the United States, a position it has held as the primary source of imported frozen fries for 5 consecutive years, with American export volumes falling and import volumes increasing across that same period. CBC News. The United States, in other words, has been moving in the wrong direction on supply chain dependency for years. Its reliance on Canadian frozen potato products has deepened, not narrowed. The trade and tariff disruptions of 2025 did not create this vulnerability. They simply exposed how deep it had already become and how little the American side had done to address it. The antitrust case unfolding in the federal courts is not a peripheral story. It is a direct examination of how market power becomes institutional power. 2 class action lawsuits were filed in the United States District Court in Illinois, naming McCain Foods, Cavendish Farms, Lamb Weston, and J.R. Simplot as defendants, and alleging that the 4 companies conspired to fix prices on frozen potato products, including French fries, hash browns, and tater tots. Market Reports World. The legal claim is specific. According to the complaint, the defendants allegedly coordinated lockstep price hikes that resulted in a 47% increase in frozen potato product prices from July 2022 to July 2024, despite falling input costs, allowing the companies to achieve unprecedented profit margins. McCain Foods. The 4 processors collectively control 97% of the $68 billion frozen potato products market in the United States. NHH McCain Foods vigorously denied the allegations. Lamb Weston stated the claims were without merit. The cases remain pending and the allegations unproven. But the concentration figures are not contested. 4 companies, 97% of the market. That is the structural condition inside which this litigation proceeds. The Prince Edward Island export suspension of 2021 is a separate and equally instructive episode. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency suspended all fresh potato exports from Prince Edward Island to the United States after the potato wart fungus was detected in 2 fields on the island. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. The disease disfigures potatoes and reduces yields, but poses no risk to human health. The export ban is estimated to have cost the island's potato industry more than $50 million in revenue and forced farmers to destroy approximately 115 million kilograms of potatoes. Potatoes in Canada. Premier Dennis King called the decision inconceivable and vowed to challenge it through every available means, including legal action. Prime Minister Trudeau raised the issue directly with President Biden in the Oval Office in late 2021, and 5 months after that meeting, the USDA announced that trade in table stock potatoes would resume. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. The episode demonstrated with considerable precision how a phytosanitary determination, even one disputed as disproportionate, can sever a supply chain that had taken decades to build within days of a regulatory decision. The geographic and logistical asymmetry between Canada's potato-producing provinces is one of the most underreported structural facts in this entire trade debate. Alberta potato growers are better positioned than Manitoba to withstand tariff pressure because Alberta sits closer to West Coast ports. CBC News. That proximity matters enormously in a scenario where Canadian processors need to redirect frozen potato exports toward Asian customers. If tariffs persist long-term, a share of Alberta's French fries and frozen potatoes could be diverted to Asian buyers, while Manitoba, which is effectively landlocked relative to Pacific ports, would find that shipping costs make a southern route to the United States economically preferable even in a tariff environment. Your source one, Victoria Stamper, general manager of the United Potato Growers of Canada, told the Western producer that Manitoba growers are more exposed precisely because geography constrains their alternatives. The Western producer also reported that over the last 7 years, McCain Foods, Simplot, and Cavendish Farms have invested hundreds of millions of dollars into expansions and new processing plants in Alberta and Manitoba. CBC News, deepening the infrastructure base on the prairies. Those investments were made to serve the American market. Their future utility now depends entirely on whether that market remains commercially viable under whatever tariff regime ultimately persists. The contraction in planned production signals that the commercial uncertainty is already producing structural consequences. Canadian frozen potato exports to the United States doubled over the 5-year period from 2019 to 2024, rising from $1.2 billion to $2.4 billion. The grower that growth was built on continuous investment, stable commercial relationships, and the absence of any serious policy threat to cross-border trade. All three of those conditions are now in question simultaneously. Victoria Stamper confirmed that volume decreases in potato processor contracts have been announced even before formal contract negotiations were completed for the 2025 growing season, directly tied to the uncertainty created by tariff threats. The grower. The Western producer also noted that former Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Poloz observed that trade does not happen between countries, it happens between people, and that those people on both sides of the border still want to do business together. That human dimension of the supply chain, the relationships between Canadian processors and American buyers built over years, is not easily or quickly reconstructed with new customers in Asia or elsewhere. The contraction, once it sets in at the farm level, takes years to reverse. The strategic geography of Alberta is not theoretical. It is the most concrete and commercially actionable element in Canada's position. Alberta's proximity to West Coast ports positions it as the most viable Canadian province to redirect frozen fry exports toward Asian customers if the trade war with the United States becomes a long-term structural reality rather than a short-term policy disruption. CBC News. The Western producer was precise on this point. Manitoba, by contrast, faces a different calculation. The province sent $771 million worth of prepared potatoes, including French fries, to the United States in 2024, representing 95% of all its prepared potato exports that year. Your source one. That degree of concentration in a single market is not a supply chain strategy. It is a single point of commercial exposure. Manitoba's processing plants in Carberry and Portage-la-Prairie were built and expanded to serve American buyers. Reorienting them toward Pacific markets requires port access, new buyer relationships, and cold chain logistics that do not currently exist at scale. The asymmetry between Alberta and Manitoba on this question is one of the most important and least discussed variables in the policy debate about Canada's options. The foreign processor entry story is where the American domestic response to supply chain fragility begins to take institutional form. Belgian potato processor Agristo has chosen Grand Forks, North Dakota, as the site for its first United States production facility, a direct investment of more than $450 million, selected for the region's high-quality potato farming, available agricultural land, and sufficient market scale for its private label products. The Washington Post site preparation has officially begun on a 360-acre plot in Grand Forks, with the facility scheduled to begin operations in January 2028 and requiring over 20,000 acres of potatoes to supply at full capacity. CTV News Atlantic Agristo's arrival is not the only signal. Lamb Weston committed a $195 million facility investment in the Netherlands in November 2024, while European processor Agristo's $450 million investment in North Dakota in 2025 indicates market growth potential despite regulatory and supply chain constraints. TikTok. The pattern is consistent. Foreign capital is entering the American domestic potato processing space, drawn by the scale of American demand and the demonstrated fragility of a supply chain that had become overwhelmingly dependent on a single foreign source. Whether that capital arrives in time to materially reduce the dependency before the next disruption arrives is the question that no investment announcement can yet answer. The record here is clear, and it is not comfortable reading. A 25% tariff fractured a bilateral agricultural supply chain that took decades to construct under formal treaty obligations. Canadian processors, facing commercial uncertainty, began reducing contract volumes before planting season decisions were even finalized. McCain Foods, the world's largest frozen fry producer, operates 51 plants across 6 continents. It does not need the American market the way the American market needs it. That asymmetry is legal, commercial, and structural. The antitrust litigation in Illinois federal court exposes a domestic market where 4 companies control 97% of supply. The Prince Edward Island wart disease suspension demonstrated that a single regulatory determination can sever a supply chain within days. Alberta's geography positions Canada for an Asian pivot. Manitoba's does not. And foreign capital, specifically Agristo's $450 million investment in North Dakota, is now entering the American domestic processing space precisely because the fragility of the existing system has become visible to outside investors before it became visible to American policymakers. The systemic failure here is not accidental. It is the product of decades of optimizing for efficiency while ignoring resilience. Every buffer was removed. Every redundancy was eliminated. Every backup supplier was deprioritized in favor of the lowest cost, highest volume, most convenient source. That source was Canada. It was always Canada. And no risk committee, no scenario planner, no logistics engineer apparently thought to ask what happens if that source redirects. The analytical warning is this: potatoes are visible, the shortage is measurable, the political consequences are immediate and documented, but the same structural dependency exists across dozens of other agricultural and industrial input categories in supply chains that have not yet been stress tested. The next disruption will not announce itself. It will arrive the same way this one did, quietly, commercially, and entirely legally. If this analysis served you, subscribe now. New, verified, legally grounded coverage posts regularly. Share this with anyone who still believes supply chain risk is someone else's problem. It is not. It is everyone's problem, and the evidence is already on the record.